Palestinians in Gaza have weathered a year and a half of war and are used to making do without electricity. But a decision by the Israeli government to cut the supply of electricity, including to a crucial water treatment plant, has sparked fresh warnings of a dire health crisis. Ahmed Al-Rubai manages the water desalination plant in Deir el-Balah. The power cut has forced the plant to turn to fuel generators to keep operating. But fuel must be brought in through crossings, and crossings are controlled by Israel.
With the closure of the crossings and the shortage of fuel supplies, we currently cannot predict how long we can operate our generators. If the closure of crossings continues, the situation threatens to become a catastrophe.
He said daily clean water output has plummeted from 18,000 cubic meters to just 2,000 cubic meters, a drop of 80%. That means civilians may turn to contaminated water. Tariq Shaheen is the director of the Deir el-Balah municipality.
This threatens the spread of intestinal or skin diseases and reduced hygiene among citizens. Therefore, we expect that if the closure continues, God forbid, an environmental and health disaster will occur.
The war was triggered by a Hamas-led cross-border attack on southern Israel in October 2023 that killed 1,200 people and saw 251 taken hostage, according to Israeli tallies. Israel's retaliation has killed more than 48,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials, left most of its people destitute, and razed much of the territory to the ground. Israel's energy minister instructed the state power company to cut sales of electricity to Gaza, which he described as a means of pressuring Hamas to free hostages. The first phase of a ceasefire that expired last week saw the release of some Israeli captives, or their bodies, in exchange for thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. It's unclear whether the sides will proceed to a second phase.
Sheep are stolen in the dead of night from a Bedouin community in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Activists and local residents said armed Israeli settlers took hundreds of them, in one of the biggest incidents they'd seen of settler harassment of the Bedouin. The incident was filmed by Israeli activist group Mistaklim, whose name means looking the occupation in the eye. "I'm shocked, poor things," they can be heard saying. One told Reuters it happened fast. They saw settlers break into homes, then heard the sheep from their pens. Residents said about 1,500 sheep and goats were herded away, under the eyes of police and soldiers. Hani Zayed said he lost 70 sheep in Friday's attack.
The kids told us that they saw two men carrying lights coming from the settlement. When we went to check on them, they shone the light towards us. His idea was to distract us, because we found out that he mixed his sheep with our sheep.
An Israeli police statement denied the incident took place as described. Israel's military did not comment, nor did a group representing settlers in the area. Mr. Klim set up a monitoring point there following previous attacks, which have increased since the Gaza war broke out. For Bedouin herders, the loss of a flock usually means the loss of their livelihood. And like many Palestinians, the semi-nomadic herders in Ain al-Auja believe the larger goal is to force them from the land and allow a full takeover by Israel. 2 years ago, Palestinians enjoyed swimming in Ain al-Auja's spring. Now it's reserved for use by settlers. The Bedouin encampment, which locals say was established around 40 years ago, has to bring in water by tanker. Local resident Tariq Obayat says settlers covet the area for its terrain and climate, and that Israel has been trying to displace people here for years. US President Donald Trump has lifted sanctions on violent settlers. Fueled by speculation that he'll give Israel the green light to annex the West Bank, Israeli ministers have spoken openly about taking over the territory, which Israel captured during the 1967 Middle East War and has occupied ever since. For mother of 5 Naifeh Salame, the situation means her family sleeps with fear. She described the Friday attack as terrifying and said closing your door won't keep you safe. They broke through the doors and entered people's homes, she says, beating women and children while they slept.
Rescued hostages were seen arriving safely in Pakistan's Quetta under tight security earlier today after separatist militants blew up a railway track and opened fire on a passenger train a day earlier. Pakistani forces have rescued 155 passengers from the train that was hijacked by separatist fighters, and an operation was underway to rescue dozens still under hostage, according to authorities. Relatives of the released passengers gathered at Quetta railway station, anxiously awaiting to receive their loved ones, while others desperately sought information about those still missing. The Baloch Liberation Army, an ethnic armed group, claimed responsibility for the attack and threatened to start executing hostages unless Baloch political prisoners, activists and missing persons it said had been abducted by the military were not released within 48 hours. BLA said on Tuesday it was holding 214 people hostage, and a security source told Reuters that there were 425 passengers on the train when it was attacked.
मतलब असला के देश थे लोग उन्होंने हमला किया इसी तरह काफ़ी नुकसान पहुंचाया आवाम को बहुत डैमेज किया है आवाम को जख्मी हुए लोग कुछ फौत हो गए
The number of militants involved in the attack was not clear. This is so far.
Ukraine on Tuesday agreed to accept a U.S. proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire in the conflict with Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the agreement after more than 8 hours of talks between Ukrainian and U.S. officials in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation.
Rubio said he would now take the offer to Moscow.
And we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court.
The development comes after a stunning Oval Office shouting match between the presidents of the two countries.
You're gambling with World War III.
The rift had immediate repercussions for Ukraine. President Donald Trump canceled military support and ended crucial intelligence sharing. But as part of accepting the proposed ceasefire, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said Washington will resume sharing aid and intelligence with Kyiv.
And that's effective immediately.
Outside the White House, Trump said there would be a U.S. meeting with Russia to discuss the ceasefire plan soon.
Hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. I think it's a big difference between the last visit you saw at the Oval Office and this. So that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to wipe out a deal. If we can't, we just keep going on and people are going to get killed, lots of people.
Is Zelensky invited back to the White House?
Sure, absolutely.
Later, Russia's foreign ministry said it didn't rule out contacts with U.S. representatives over the next several days, according to state news agency RIA. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was in Saudi Arabia but did not participate in the talks, said the ceasefire was a positive proposal.
Вважаємо це позитивним.
He also said the two countries would work to finalize a minerals agreement.
Russia says it has yet to be formally contacted by the United States about a ceasefire in its war with Ukraine, and that it rejects the use of NATO forces as peacekeepers if a deal is agreed. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told journalists,
"The presence of the troops from NATO countries under any flag in any capacity on Ukrainian soil is the same threat."
You won't accept it under any conditions?
Under any conditions, well, nobody is talking to us. They keep saying nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, but they do everything about Russia without Russia. Trump, by the way, when asked about peacekeepers, he said, well, it's too early to discuss this, but normally you need the consent of the parties. Why should we give consent to the peacekeeping force or peacekeeping group even, not force, though they want force, from the composed of the countries who declared us an enemy, and they would come as peacekeepers.
Attacks Iran as Prime Minister Netanyahu.
The second thing is the rights and the fate of the people who live not only on the liberated territories, but on the territories under the control of the regime. They also, most of them, speak Russian. They were brought as part of the Russian culture. And they want their kids to know Russian and to learn Russian. Trump is already saying about a meeting at 3, US, China, Russia. He mentioned that he would like to discuss nuclear weapons, security issues. We would be open to any format which is based on mutual respect, on equality, no prejudged solutions. If our Chinese friends would be interested, it would be their decision. But this does not negate the importance of Russia-US dialogue on strategic stability.
He continued,
Trump, by the way, when asked about peacekeepers, he said, well, it's too early to discuss this, but normally you need the consent of the parties. Why should we give consent to the peacekeeping force or peacekeeping group even, not force, though they want force, from the composed of the countries who declared us an enemy, and they would come as peacekeepers.
Lavrov said that the UK and Europe were trying to prolong the Ukraine war.
Europe and the UK, they certainly want this to continue. The way they received Zelensky in London after the scandal in Washington, and it's an indication that they want to raise the stakes, and they are preparing something to pressure Trump administration back into some aggressive action against Russia.
In a separate radio interview, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Russia is carefully studying statements issued after the US-Ukraine discussions, but that Russia is waiting for direct contact from the White House. He said he doesn't rule out a phone call between Presidents Putin and Trump. Meanwhile, the proposals for a Ukraine-Russia peace deal brought a sharp uptick in European share prices.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that he was doubling his planned tariff on all steel and aluminum products from Canada to 50%. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said the additional 25% tariff on Canadian metals will go into effect on Wednesday morning.
We need to end the chaos once and for all.
It comes in response to Ontario Premier Doug Ford imposing a 25% tariff on electricity coming into Michigan, Minnesota, and New York State.
This surcharge will cost families and businesses in these states up to $400,000 each and every single day. On an average, this will add around $100 per month to the bills of hardworking Americans.
On Tuesday, Ford said he would not back down until Trump's tariffs on Canadian imports were gone for good, echoing his words a day earlier.
If the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Trump also threatened to substantially increase tariffs on cars coming into the U.S., quote, if other egregious long-time tariffs are not likewise dropped by Canada. The hyper-focus on tariffs since Trump took office has rattled investor, consumer, and business confidence in ways that economists increasingly worry could cause a recession.
Donald Trump has defended his use of tariffs and dismissed concerns about market volatility sparked by the global trade turmoil. Speaking to a gathering of business leaders in Washington on Tuesday, the US president said his trade policy was already showing results.
We have car companies that are not building in Mexico now, they're building in the United States. Some of them, the plants were already started and they stopped construction, and now they're going to build in the United States. It was very unfair that they'd build in Mexico and sell them across the border with no tax, no nothing.
In the audience were around 100 CEOs, and some of them may be feeling growing unease. They've all seen some $4 trillion wiped off the value of US stocks in recent weeks, amid fears over the impact of the trade war. Businesses have also been concerned by the volatility of the tariffs, which have been variously imposed and delayed, raised and lowered. On Tuesday there was more of that, with turmoil over duties on Canadian metals. Early in the day, Trump said he would double levies to 50%. He was responding to a move by the Canadian province of Ontario to impose its own tariffs on electricity supplied to America. Hours later, Ontario dropped the move, and Trump said US duties would stick at 25%. The fresh day of turmoil drove another down day for stocks, outweighing glimmers of hope over a Ukraine ceasefire. More big firms, including retailer Kohl's, also warned that the darkening economic outlook was hitting sales. In the end, the Dow Jones Index closed the day down another 1%. But if that worries Trump, it didn't show on Tuesday.
The tariffs are having a tremendously positive impact. They will have, and they are having.
Trump said his tariffs would generate a lot of money for the US and could be raised even higher in the days ahead.
French President Emmanuel Macron responded to comments by far-right figures yesterday, saying that France had to address both the threat of terrorism and the one posed by Russia. Minutes before laying the first stone of the future site of the Internal Security General Directorate, Macron was reacting to remarks by far-right National Rally Vice President Sébastien Chenu, who said last week Islamic terrorism was the first threat on French soil, as opposed to Russia.
J'entendais dans les débats ces derniers jours des gens qui en quelque sorte remettaient en cause la menace géopolitique. Le président de la République inventerait la menace russe. La vraie menace, c'est le terrorisme. Parfois, ils ont d'autres obsessions même. Mais on n'a pas attendu de lutter contre la menace terroriste. Vous en êtes l'incarnation et les chiffres que je viens de rappeler en sont la preuve. Ces gens-là n'ont pas suivi l'actualité manifestement. Et une grande nation, elle n'a pas à choisir, elle a à répondre. Et elle n'a pas à décider de lutter contre les menaces géopolitiques qui s'imposent à elle, ou contre les menaces sur son sol projetées par les terroristes. Elle a à faire les deux en même temps. C'est ce que nous faisons.
Macron said in an address to the nation last Wednesday that Russia was a threat to Europe and said Paris would consider putting other countries under its nuclear protection.
Et dans la période que nous connaissons, nous savons ce que représente cet investissement. 1,2 milliard d'euros de la part de l'État, 2,6 milliards si on ajoute le projet de Vincennes, ce qui veut dire que pour la transformation de nos grands sites, pour les deux grandes directions générales, c'est un investissement inédit de la nation qui sera porté. Inédit, historique.
What is the crime that I committed?
The Philippines firebrand former leader Rodrigo Duterte was arrested upon his arrival at Manila's main airport on Tuesday. That was at the request of the International Criminal Court and confirmed by the office of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. It's a major step in the court's investigation into thousands of alleged extrajudicial killings during Duterte's presidency-defining war on drugs.
Now, the legal basis for my being here.
Duterte questioned the reason for his arrest in an Instagram video posted by his daughter Veronica from his custody at a Manila airbase. Duterte's drug war was a campaign promise that swept the maverick crime-busting mayor to presidential power in 2016. Reuters captured graphic footage at the time of the violence. According to police, 6,200 suspects were killed during anti-drug operations, but activists say the real death toll of the crackdown was far greater. Police deny any involvement in those killings and reject allegations from rights groups of systematic executions and cover-ups. Duterte has repeatedly defended the crackdown and denied ordering the murder of drug suspects, saying he instructed police to kill only in self-defense. On Tuesday, some of his supporters rallied outside the airbase where he was held. Reuters spoke to Rose, a supporter of Duterte's, at the airport.
Duterte is old, and he did not deserve what they did to him. What he did was for the Philippines. The time that he was the president was peaceful. There was less crime and there was order when he was in power. He did not deserve this treatment.
Duterte's ally and former legal counsel Salvador Pinello said the arrest was unlawful and police had denied legal representation. Human Rights Watch called the arrest a critical step for accountability in the Philippines and said authorities should swiftly hand Duterte over to the ICC.
The long-awaited trial of Diego Maradona's medical team began on Tuesday in Argentina. It's a case that has sparked strong emotions in the country, where the soccer star who died in 2020 is revered. 7 members of the medical team were in court, with an 8th facing a jury trial in July. Maradona's nurses, brain surgeon and psychiatrists are among those accused of homicide by negligence. If convicted, they could face 8 to 25 years in prison. All have denied any wrongdoing.
New evidence shows that there is no criminal liability for Maradona's death on any of the accused.
Outside the courthouse near Buenos Aires, fans displayed signs reading "Justice for Dios," a nickname referencing Maradona's jersey number and the Spanish word for God. Maradona died at home in November 2020, aged 60, from a heart failure. That was while he was recovering from surgery to remove a blood clot days earlier. In 2021, investigators classified the case as culpable homicide, similar to involuntary manslaughter. They determined the accused knew of Maradona's serious health condition, but failed to take necessary measures to save him. Over 100 witness testimonies, including those from family, doctors, friends and journalists, will be presented to the 3-judge court. Considered one of the greatest soccer players ever and revered for leading Argentina to World Cup glory in 1986, Maradona battled drug addiction and ill health for years. His death rocked Argentina, prompting an outpouring of grief and finger-pointing over who was to blame.
At a children's home in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, children living with HIV/AIDS play. But the staff here fear for their future, as US aid cuts threaten to disrupt their vital drug supply. President Donald Trump's 90-day foreign aid freeze has upended the global supply chain for drugs to fight diseases including HIV. But it's also blocked the distribution of drugs that long ago reached their destination countries. The manager of Nyambani Children's Home, Sister Teresa Palakudi, is concerned about access to life-saving HIV meds called antiretrovirals, or ARVs.
If you stop ARVs for these children, there is drug resistance. Afterwards, they will get all kind of opportunistic infections. Then we lose one by one.
The executive director of the home said that if they start purchasing ARVs, a rough estimate is $120 per child per month. And that's without other drugs, including TB medication and food supplements. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city, millions of doses of ARVs sit on the shelves of a warehouse, unused and unreachable. A Kenya health official said without US funding, distribution of the $34 million worth of medication sitting there has ceased. An ex-USAID executive said this stock, which Washington has not released funds to distribute, includes 2.5 million bottles of ARVs, 750,000 HIV test kits, and 500,000 malaria treatments. In the meantime, Kenya is scrambling to fill the gaps.
They are dependent on Treasury to release funds.
Kenya's Health Minister, Deborah Barasa, said she expected her government to mobilise funds to allow the supplies to be released within 2 to 4 weeks. But it is not yet clear whether the government has allocated the money to do so. Kenyan Christian charity Meds that runs the warehouse and the US State Department did not respond to requests for comment.